I'm pleased to present James Francis Sr., the Director of Cultural and Historic Preservation for the Penobscot Nation. He is probably among the most influential public educators, specifically on Indigenous issues, working in Maine in the last couple decades. Francis has served on the Wabanakis Studies Commission, helping implement new Maine Native American Studies law into Maine schools, and he's managed a team of teachers and cultural experts in developing curricula. He served as a guest curator at institutions from the Abbey Museum in Bangor to Harvard University. He's also a filmmaker, most notably of Invisible, looking at the problem of anti-Indigenous racism in Maine and the Canadian Maritimes. He's also a photographer and an artist, most recently of a painting, We Walk On Eternally, which is featured prominently in the MHS exhibit, State of Mind Becoming Maine, which is available online now and will hopefully soon open again in person. And this painting includes a striking recreation of the infamous 1755 Scalp Bounty Proclamation by then Lieutenant Governor Spencer Phipps, calling for a bounty on Indigenous scalps as a powerful backdrop to a Penobscot invitation for all Mainers, non-Native and Indigenous alike, to join hands and walk eternally into the future. And so we'll leave it at that. We invite you all to look at that at the Maine Memory Network and in person once, hopefully things go well, things open up. And with that, I turn things over to James Francis.
Good morning, and thank you, Ian, for stealing my thunder. Actually, I don't know if you guys can see this Scalp Proclamation. I think that by looking at the history of the Maine state and the indigenous populations of Maine's history, we must start in 1755 with this Scalp Proclamation. I want to spend a little bit of time looking at this document and explaining what's going on in this document. It was issued by Spencer Phipps, Esquire, who was the Lieutenant Governor and Commander-in-Chief of the province of Massachusetts Bay in New England. However, it was by his honor, it says, who was King George II, and that's King George's seal at the top of the document. And this is in a proclamation, and it says, whereas the tribe of Penobscot Indians have repeatedly in perfidious manner acted contrary to their solemn submission unto his majesty, long since made and frequently renewed, King George II. I have hereby, at the desire of the House of Representatives, with the advice of His Majesty's Council, thought it's to issue this proclamation and to declare the Penobscot tribe of Indians to be enemies, rebels, and traitors of His Majesty King George II. And I do hereby require His Majesty's subjects of the province, Massachusetts Bay Colony, which included Maine, to embrace all opportunity of pursuing, captivating, killing, and destroying all and every Penobscot Indian. All and every. This document is a document of genocide. This was a document in 1755 to try to exterminate Penobscot people. Now, this document hangs in our community everywhere. It's kind of seen as a badge of pride in our Penobscot community that we survived these bounties. You know, below the bounties are listed for every male Penobscot above the age of 12 years, you know, taken as prisoner, 50 pounds, for every scalp of a male Penobscot Indian above the age, you know, et cetera, et cetera. If you take these figures in pounds and you calculate them, there was a total of $60,000 worth of bounties on this document. probably like 50 pounds is right around $12,000. So it was a huge incentive for, as they call them in here, the subjects of the province to embrace all opportunities. It was a huge incentive for them to do this, to take those lives, to exterminate Penobscot people. Now, keep in mind, this is 20 years before the American Revolution. So as we move forward in time and we get to the American Revolution, we hear about Joseph Orono, chief of the Penobscots, blue-eyed chief of the Penobscots. He had ties to France through his grandfather, who was the Baron of St. Castin, who was a very fair-skinned, blue-eyed, red-haired man. And Joseph Orono traveled to Watertown, Massachusetts after corresponding with General George Washington. And it was at Watertown on June 21st, 1775, so exactly 20 years after this document. He says that our white brothers, the Americans, tell us that they came to our land to enjoy liberty and life, but their kin of England is coming to bind them in chains and to kill them. We, Penobscots, must fight him. We will stand on the same ground as our brothers, the Americans. This is a very important time. You know, people often say that we sided with the Americans during the Revolution, but we were already at war with Britain at the time because of the Scalp Proclamation. And so I often say that they actually sided with us against our enemy. But this was very pivotal. It wasn't only Joseph Orono's proclamation. It was also, you know, Chief Francis Joseph Neptune, who becomes a hero at the Battle of Machias. It said that he was renowned for his extraordinary long-range musket shot that killed a British officer and repulsed the attack at Machias Bay, a very key battle in Maine during the Revolutionary War. It was thwarted by the Wabanaki people. James Lehman in Maine and the American Revolution states that indeed Indian support for the American cause during the Revolutionary War was nothing short of astonishing. So as we go on in time, we see that a very important treaty was signed in 1818 with Massachusetts and the Penobscots. And this outlined our reservation land. And in that 1818, there was a few things in there that kind of outlined that it was all the islands in the Penobscot River from Old Town Island north to what we call Nicketow, which is the fork between the East Branch and the West Branch of the Penobscot River, in a town that we call Medway today. It also outlines a few acres in Brewer, and also 4 upper townships. So these townships on the map today, one is where Mattawamkeag is today, and just across the river from Mattawamkeag, I believe it's called Wynn or Woodville. The other 2, where Millinocket is today, was one of these 4 upper townships, and just west of there, and still labeled on the map as Indian Purchase, was one of those other 4 townships. Now, this is 2 years prior to Maine becoming a state, and when Maine becomes a state in 1820, they take over the duties of this treaty that Massachusetts had signed. And one of those things was to repair the church and to build a store on Indian Island adjacent to Old Town. And Massachusetts paid the state of Maine $35,000 at that time to take care of those two items, which was part of the treaty. In 1820, Maine basically ratifies the 1818 treaty with the Treaty of 1820, which was just carried over, not for Massachusetts' responsibility anymore, but Maine's responsibility. So Maine takes over charge of not only the treaty, but in Maine's first legislature, Maine thought it was very important that they pass an act. This is in 1821, the Act for the Regulation of the Penobscot and Passamaquoddy Tribe of Indians. This act had 6 sections. It provided that the governor, with the consent of council, might appoint 1, not exceeding 3, to be agents of the tribe. Now, these Indian agents were appointed by the state of Maine to deal directly with the tribes. Even when I was growing up, when I was very young, we still had Indian agents on the reservation. So right from the beginning of Maine statehood, they established paternalistic control over the tribes. And these agents, they had the care and management of property for their use and for benefit of the tribes themselves, so it is said. And they gave themselves the rights to sell the land, to do improvements on the land, to lease the land, regardless of the tribe's interest in those things. And so what happens by 1833, the state of Maine, through the agents, have sold off all but the islands in the Penobscot River. The 4 upper townships, which are considered a so-called sale in Penobscot history, were sold off by the state and was then no longer Penobscot Reservation land. And that $35,000 received from Massachusetts, there was a fund in the state coffers that kept money to that was earned by the tribe to be distributed to the tribes as the agents deemed fit. And when the church was repaired and when the store was built, the tribe was charged against that account. And so essentially, the state of Maine kind of double dipped on that agreement, and we as a tribe ended up paying for those things when they had already gotten paid from Massachusetts and so forth. So one of the things that we were doing was leasing the use of our islands, especially during the log driving days. There were booms all the way up and down the Penobscot River, where the agent was negotiating with paper companies and log driving companies and others to ensure that they had a place to tie their booms and corral their logs as they came downriver. And those monies went into the state coffers. So one of the things that was really telling about the relationship between the tribes and the state was this constant kind of status of being wards of the state and being second-class citizens and being less than. And think it was 1843, there was a court case where a Passamaquoddy was taken to court for hunting a deer out of season. And it went all the way to the top court in the state of Maine. And during the judges, this was Murch versus Toma, 1842, and during his decision in the highest court of Maine, the judge wrote that although endowed with the attributes belonging to our species, and in fact a portion of the human race, and born within our borders, and by the terms of our commission having seemingly an inalienable right to the acquisition of control of property, yet as a people, and as it were nationally and collectively, they are treated, and perhaps necessarily so to a certain extent at least, having none of these attributes, imbecility on their part and the dictates of humanity on ours have necessarily prescribed them in their subjugation to our paternalistic control, in disregard of some, at least, of abstract principles of the rights of man. The courts were saying that they justified paternalistic control over the tribe because of our imbecility. What I find striking about this is that this seems to persist, at least persist for another 100 years. In 1954, you see the Proctor Report coming from state legislator Proctor, who wanted to kind of examine all the general trends and practices, study of treaties, legislations, handling of funds, and other responsibilities by the states and Indian agents. And they unwittingly found that the state was misappropriating funds during this. In fact, when it came to part of the land claims, the state absolved themselves from any wrongdoing. So when it came time to, as an artist, to do something for the bicentennial exhibit at the Maine Historical Society, I thought it was very important to, make a statement. And that statement was that we are still here. You can see here that same Scalp Proclamation, quite a large painting that I did. You can see an image of a man with his arms outstretched, looking to the sky, underneath the text of the proclamation. But written in Penobscot, across in blood red, is a word that means we walk on eternally. That despite documents like this, despite overzealous fostering of Indian children into white homes, despite the allotment acts, despite Indian residential schools, that our culture will survive, will persist, that we will walk on eternally. And considering that it was just in 1975, certainly within my lifetime, that we got from underneath the thumb of state control, I think that control, that attitude, those state controls still persist today. We still live within the shadow of these racist colonial dictates. And part of the reason for doing this piece wasn't strictly to have a political statement, but as Ian says at the beginning, it was to urge Maine citizens to step out from that shadow, to do the right thing, to embrace and walk hand in hand with Native American populations of Maine. You know, today, after the unfortunate death of Mr. Floyd and all that's going on in the country with the removal of the Redskins football team, possibly. Now, just to let you know what a Redskin is, Redskins are those scalps. During the colonial era, you could take your beaver skins, your deer skins, all to the trade house. And if you had scalps, they called them Redskins. So that name is not only derogatory, but it's, the meaning is based in a genocidal act that is right here in this document. But again, walking forward, moving together, hand in hand into the future is the only way today. And one thing that I stress to the citizens of Maine is to really reconsider how the Maine Indian Land Claims Act is interpreted. Because that, again, was just the oppression all over again. And it was the sale of the land that the state assumed they had control over, and also the taking of other lands prior to that, which was the impetus of the Indian Land Claims Settlement Act, not only for the Penobscots, but also the Passamaquoddy. But with that, I am going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much to James, and I'll point out that we just got a chat available to everybody where you can see that artwork at the Maine Memory net. Okay, so everybody in attendance is able to see that. Okay, thanks very much. Okay.